All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast for today's show. It is an honor and privilege to be joined by Sacha Stone, who I know many of my listeners are likely familiar with his work, but he's a man that I've been following for many years and somebody I view as a true visionary and leader as we're really initiating this paradigm shift and attempting to embody this higher level of consciousness, bring about the new earth. So, Sasha, thank you for taking the time to come on the show, man. It's truly an honor and a pleasure.
Very good. Well, nice to meet you, and thank you for the kind words.
Absolutely, brother. And I'd love to start by diving right into it. I was watching a video of yours. It was on social media, and it was from one of your podcast appearances that you went on. But there was a term that you used that really struck with me, that it like struck a chord in my heart. Like it so resonated deeply to describe that the times that we're in, right? And you said this is a time of a resurrection of the angelic human. And I had never heard that phrase directly, but the second you said that, like I was like, that's it right there, a resurrection of the angelic human. And I feel like this could be kind of a good jumping point into the type of discussion we're going to have today. I was wondering if you could speak to that concept where we're at right now as a humanity and this idea of this sort of resurrection, because I feel like that's exactly what it is that we are entering when we're looking at the type of world that we're trying to create.
Well, I very much suspect that any human being who is resonating in truth, and by truth I'm speaking about objective, pure truth, not Sacha Stone's subjective truth or your subjective truth, but there is an objective truth, the isness, the ground of being, and that's what I refer to as the flame of pure truth. And I always make the distinction, not in order to do linguistics, but in order to create that concrete notion that we need to transcend our own ideas of reality in order to position ourselves, station ourselves in a state of witness. And if we're in a state of witness, we become in a state of grace. So the part of you that resonated with what you heard come out of me is the part of you which is in a state of witness and not one which is an interested observer. Because the interested observer is the ego, is the one that's always jumping in and out of the narrative, participating in the dialectic, jumping on the black and white of the checkerboard. But the state of grace, the state of witness, is the one which resonates with the highest truths. And the truth of the truth is that we know ourselves to be angelics. We know in our atom seed that we are undergoing an epochal galactic shift of ages. We know that all of the apocalyptic images which are playing out, underscore obviously the fires, storms in California in the last few days. A classic case in point of the psycho-civilizationally orchestrated apocalypse event, this threshold event, which we have been willing upon ourselves. We've been variously prognosticating the apocalypse, and therefore at the collective level of will or of plasma projection, beaming ideation into the field, we are the arbiters of that outcome. We are the ones manifesting the apocalyptic images. And yes, it's a holograph, and yes, it's real and not real at the same time, and yes, it hurts like hell to be burnt and scorched by fire and to lose one's home and all the rest of it. So all of those images are real enough, but it's not the thing. The thing is something greater, and it's about revelation. It's about Armageddon. It's about apocalypse. It's about all of these archetypal memes and themes confluencing into a perfect event horizon. And those of us who position ourselves in a state of witness and don't identify psycho-emotionally with what's happening, even in our own lives, in fact, especially in our own lives, if we're able to suspend judgment, that's the thing. if we can suspend, and judgment is psycho-emotional or psycho-intellectual identification with a moral effect or an ethical effect or a spiritual impulse. And I'm saying if we can simply withhold any judgment and simply bear witness, which is true grace in my view, because then we're not allowing our energy plasma to participate in fueling the dialectic of the kingdom of the devil.
Mm.
And if anyone's heard what I've just said there, you'll understand a deep and profound mystical truth that to bear witness and be in a state of grace is to withhold judgment, is to withhold psycho-emotional identification or even intellectual identification with anything ever. And in that state of grace, we can participate fully in life. In fact, we can become arbiters of the greater outcome because in that state of witness, we move into convention or alignment with the will of God, the grace of God. We become one and the same. We become actualized as sons and daughters of God in that sense. And therefore, my will be done is thy will be done. They become the same thing. And from this state of grace or this state of witness, I do not sanction or will into manifestation bushfires or wars or disease or poverty or desecration upon the world or injury upon any living soul. That's a true state of grace and a true state of witness. And therefore, if we remain in that motionless state of witness, we will be helping to manifest the highest outcome at any given moment. And that for me is where we're headed toward. The more these apocalyptic images unfold, and I know I've segued away from the angelic bit, but I'm getting round to it. The
Hmm.
more we delve into the hysteria of the apocalypse, the more we are participating in it. And that's just children playing with dangerous toys. And
Hmm.
when we learn that it's all, the universe is simply a feedback technology, constantly asking us, how do you want to play? And if we are consistently dreaming up bad images, bad dreaming, then that's what will manifest. It's all a feedback loop. And of course, I've been watching the various pundits and the celebrities in Hollywood speaking to camera about their life's possessions and what it took them a whole lifetime to build their home and raise their children, their grandchildren. Of course, one is sympathetic with all of that. But at the same time, there's a part of me which is just recognizing that this is perfect geometry, that the takedown of iconoclasticism, the takedown of the satanic and luciferic archetypal language of Hollywood, of California, of the City of Angels, of United States of America, District of Columbia, the whole, edifice of false light, time is money, and all of that. So that's visiting itself now in perfect counterpoint geometry in California on the West Coast. Now it's going to also visit on the East Coast. In fact, substantively more, I believe, than on the West Coast. So keep eyes to the sky there on the East Coast of America and other hotbeds of satanic logic, like Chicago is a classic case in point. And I don't want to single out particular demographics or cities in the United States, except to say that some of them are deeply, deeply steeped in the satanic and the blood ritualism and blood sacrifice that has been engendered in those places on the soil, on the living soil, and the thought forms and the bad dreaming that is issued out of many of those centers, those compression points, those kill grids, that has created in the elemental cloud, the egregore, a counterpoint geometry, which is coming back to visit now. This is a perfect sign that augurs the resurrection of the angelic. So hear me in this. It is the angelic human in Hollywood, in Malibu, in Palisades, in California, in all of these hotbeds. It is the angelic human who is right this moment now being compressed as the diamond being born in the heart of the coal. And that is the profound, mystical, transcendent, and transmutative beauty that is emerging and will emerge through these flames of Holocaust. So when we understand the nature of alchemy and the nature of so-called evil, the nature of destructivity, and how these things are always perfect counterpoint geometry. There's no victim ever, anywhere. There cannot be a victim in God's kingdom. There is no victim ever. And even to hold on to the notion or the idea that one or the other of us is a victim is to be trapped in Luciferic false light. So you cannot grasp these profound mystical truths so long as you are blaming or shaming or judging or identifying. So thank you for recognizing and resonating to what you heard me say in an earlier broadcast to someone recently, because I've been saying this for an awful long time.
Mm.
And again, I'm saying it not because it's Sacha Stone's little prophetic truth. No one gives a fuck about Sacha Stone or his prophetic truth, least of all me. But what I do care about deeply and passionately is the flame of pure truth. And as I see that emerging, and as I continuously attune myself and I won't say subjugate my ego, because I don't subjugate anything. I express it to the fullest extent so that it doesn't need to express anymore. That's my way of subjugating anything. Allow it complete freedom to reign, and it'll become quelled by the higher frequency in the quanta. And as long as I am holding grace, I will pacify any low frequency, including an assassin's bullet. I've seen this over the years. So the angelic human and the resurrection thereof does become the central theme of this extraordinary axis point in our upshift. Having said that, there's another narrative, and if you don't mind, I'll just wax on that for a moment,
Hmm.
because it is so desperately important for people to understand, especially those who want to understand why apocalypse is visiting upon so many of our fellows, so many people around the world, in so many places around the world at this time. And that is to do with the unresolved issue of the ancestral blood song. And
Mm.
that's the piece that I'm about to kick off in the US. I'll be in California in a couple of weeks' time, God willing, and as long as there's not some martial provision and military, law being implemented there, which is not out of the question, frankly. All things being equal, I'll be there in a couple of weeks' time in Los Angeles to kick off my social tour in the US, which will go through to the end of February. And what I'm putting out on that social tour is really elaborating on this metric of the ancestral blood song. What is it? Why is it making itself heard? Why must why we must at this time, at this end of time, why we must still our cultural, social, civilizational white noise of mania, of, again, Luciferic false light, helter-skelter fucking bullshit. Can we suspend that at the collective level for a moment in order to make space for 500 years of blood sacrifice of the black skin, brown skin, red skin, yellow skin, and white skin peoples of the world who've been subjected to the satanic penalties of the Vatican complex, of the Roman Catholic Church, of the monotheistic religious faiths, all of which have variously been utterly weaponized by the Sabbatean, Jesuitical, invisible masters operating in the civilizational basement. Those same deep state motherfuckers who are being exposed roundabout now by the grace of the living God. So that 500 years plus, of course, it goes back thousands of years to pre-Sumerian times, but I'm speaking principally about the moment in history 500 odd years ago when the Vatican gave license to the crowns of Europe to go forth and conquest the world in the name of God and to maraud and massacre um, the natives. And because they were designated and still are to this day designated as Homo animalis, subhumans, provided they are not white skins. So that piece is connected to the ancestral blood song, the holocausts, the diasporas, the pogroms, the world wars, the millions of battlefields from outer Mongolia to Patagonia, which have seen the blood sacrifice and bloodletting of innocent boys and girls, men and women, young and old, over centuries. That sacrifice of innocence, that harvest of humanity has a toll and needs accounting for at the psycho-spiritual civilizational level. There is an atonement that needs to be had, be
Mm.
undertaken. And an atonement has to be an act of conscious will. It has to be real. So I'm not talking about taking the knee to Caesar, to render coin unto Caesar as a reflex of cultural or psychological fear, because government says you need to pay them tax, you pay them tax. I've never paid a dime tax. I won't start now.
Mm-hmm.
I live like a king.
Yeah.
Point is not taking the knee to Caesar to render unto Caesar that which Caesar says is Caesar's. Caesar doesn't actually exist.
Right.
I'm old and ugly and experienced enough to have learned this forensically because I
Mm.
went on the front foot in search of Caesar. Who or where is this great magi? Who is then where is this great king of kings? I've met multiple kings of kings, sultans and rajas. God knows a half a dozen of them are going to be convened here in just over a week from now in a very important hereditary redemption event that's taking place that I'm hosting here in my home in a week's time. And they'll
Mm.
be coming in from around the world. I understand, you know, what it is to take the knee to Caesar and why humanity has been subjugated into that over millennia, but certainly for the last few centuries. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking now about I'm talking about us now as an act of atonement,
Mm.
taking the knee to the living principle that will now be heard, which
Mm.
is the resurrection of the ancestral blood song, which has been subjugated, quelled for far too long. And you see, it is that unheard ancestral blood song, and it courses through my veins as much as it does yours, Evan. All of us are carrying cosmogenetics in our blood song, but we're also carrying the wounds and the injury of millennia in our
Mm.
blood, because we are at the end of a cascade in the blood of unresolved, unrequited cycles, incarnations. And the resurrection of the ancestral blood song or the restoration of the ancestral blood song, when I speak to that, I'm speaking about the need for that which has been sublimated
Mm.
by billions of souls for
Yeah.
hundreds and thousands of years. That needs to now be allowed to surface and to touch the light, so to speak. And that's going to happen either which way. There is no further sublimation or subjugation. It is not permitted under any law, as we've already ended the thrall of time. So 1260 TikTok time already ended on the 21st of December in 2020, if we want to be precise about these idiotic Vatican-inspired calendric systems. But the fact of the matter is, we are now in this flux subsequent to the 21st, 22nd of December 2020. We are in a flux field. And it's a sort of hyperdimensional, superdimensional, interdimensional, subdimensional flux that is pulsing and awakening to
Mm.
itself in the
Mm.
temporal realm. Those of us who have clarity and who can truly be still in the storm in that sense and dream wisely are the ones whose dreams will make manifest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's a powerful time and a beautiful time. But this atonement that I speak to is the key piece that must happen now. And that's why I'm touring and speaking to as many people as will listen to my wheezing. I will speak about this subject because there's nothing more important. Angelic, human, yes, assured. Salvation, assured, absolutely assured. Redemption, more or less underway. Atonement, absolutely needfully becomes the subject of the day. I mentioned this on the 8th of April of 2024 when I was at the Zone of Silence in Mexico in the desert with the ceremonialists and the Mexican shaman, and with a very brilliant academic, Professor Alex Ling, a world's leading researcher in water consciousness, water as the
Mm-hmm.
consciousness carrier of humanity. And we were doing ceremony in the Zone of Silence, which is effectively the Area 51 of Mexico, because that's the still point. And that was the day, the 8th of April, 24, was the day of the, if you recall, the great passage of the total eclipse over North America.
Mm-hmm.
It reached its maximum directly over this navel of the Americas known as the Zone of Silence, which is in Mexico. And that's the moment that was the longest period. I think it was 4 minutes and 27 seconds or something along those lines, where the sun was fully eclipsed for that period of time. And that 4.5 minutes of the disconnect of the vibral light between the earth and the sun, that that extraordinary eclipse moment of 4.5 minutes was the moment wherein we were required as a species to begin the new dreaming. Because when
Mm-hmm.
we're cut off from the sun, that's the moment in which our own plasma, our own ideation, our own dreaming needs to be turned inward in that sense, which is why I was screeching on the day about don't be looking at the sun, don't be looking at the eclipse. Everyone turns the eclipse into a Babylonian fiesta all around the world, which is the most stupid thing you could do. But that's classic collective idiocy by humans. Is to get excited and stimulated and have adrenal rushes every time there's something external or extraneous out there that we don't understand. That's part of human nature. I get it. It's cute, but put away childish things,
Mm-hmm.
people. We're not supposed to be looking at the sun, whether you're doing it behind things you're not supposed to. We were supposed at that moment to use that 4.5 minutes where the graces, the elemental graces of the cosmos disconnected the solar principle in that sense, allowing us to stand on our feet and become the arbiters of the new dreaming. And so that's what we were doing there, was we were putting the true dreaming back into the earth, using the water molecule as the medium, as the transmitter, the capacitor of pure dreaming, pure ideation. So in any event, I'll stop waxing off on this subject just to say that there are many souls in this world, many oracles and scryers and the ceremonialists and shaman and goodly people, goodly humans of all persuasions, um, from the belly of sub-Saharan Africa, where I just returned from a few days ago. I was there for the last month, traveling in multiple countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I drove 6,000 miles through Africa, and in order to seed something there in the last month. But the point I'm making is that all around the world, we have these great humans,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them have got bones through their noses and, peacock feathers and ostrich plumes coming out of, their pith helmets. Others have got, are people in saffron colored robes and what have you. Good humans abound all around the world, those who've already situated themselves on that indivisible line and are in a state of witness and grace. And those are the people I'm most interested in conversing with at this time, because
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones that get it. And they're the ones that are inhabiting the still point. They're not psycho-emotionally reacting and identifying with every. That's why I pulled back from political activism and social activism in the last year,
Hmm.
To the chagrin of a number of my kind followers who've been upset at the fact that I've stopped speaking to the political checkerboard. And I did it uh, because I've said everything I ever needed to say in
Hmm.
that. I know where I was in 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I know the work I was doing 25 years ago in predicting what was going to come down the pike. I know what I was doing before COVID hit the world sideways. Um, you know, 6 months before here, I was hosting a World Health Sovereignty Summit with the world's leading voices on vaccines and on weaponization of the biosphere and on GMOs and phosphates and all of these heinous chemical poisons. I was warning the world through international tribunal judicial commissions of inquiry that I founded and designed and financed and brought together the bishops and secretaries of state and and leading academic pundits and judges and so on. I know the work I've been doing predictively in front of the way before it becomes a thing. And I know the rocks that I've taken at the head for being an early bird in many of these revelations, so to speak. And it's not because I'm so clever or wanting to talk myself up. I'm just saying I know what I've done to predict the apocalypse. But now that the apocalypse is upon us, I'm smart enough to know that to continue to participate in the dialectic is the very worst thing any of us could be doing. We need to be doing the new dreaming. The apocalypse is already underway, friends. This is the time beyond time where we should withdraw ourselves from the checkerboard of the kingdom of the devil, position ourselves into a state of witness and grace, non identification, and absolute detachment whilst being fully empathically alive and
Hmm.
receive all the pain of the world and use this angelic capacitor, this human technology to transmute those frequencies into higher frequencies, so to speak. And I know I sound like a goddamn hippie there, but I think
Hmm.
you get my
100%, brother. That is the process of true alchemy, and those who understand it and can feel it and resonate with it know exactly what you're speaking to. And I'm right there with you because I recognize, at least in terms of the whole political game and what's going on in DC, or we're looking at some of the ritualistic abuse or all of these different phenomenons that have been going on for centuries now. I myself too have kind of taken that same shift as you are, where it's about creating the dream. It's about envisioning not just who we can be, but who we are here in this present moment, embodying this higher dimensional and this higher frequency that we are meant to be embodying, right? I think one of the big challenges, Sasha, is that oftentimes a lot of when we're having these discussions, it can be almost outsourced to something that's in the future, right? If we're creating the new earth, that's something down the pipeline, right? But I don't think people always recognize that in order to have that down the pipeline, we need to embody it in the here and now. We need to actually be resonating it in the present if we're going to actually like actualize it and create that, right? So, and I think as soon as we kind of go into those matrix games and the political theater and really live in this space of emotional reactivity, which is really what all of the headlines fuel, regardless of what emotion it's fueling. It's fueling our identity within the actual game, with our ego, right? So if we're fueling that game, we are not dreaming, we are not envisioning, and as long as we're in that space of emotional reactivity, it's my belief that the Luciferian elite and the ones who are really manifesting a lot of these apocalyptic events, that's kind of where they want us. They want us to be emotionally reacting. They don't want us envisioning this new way of being and actually embodying it in the here and now, because the collective is really just a macrocosm for the individual state of awareness. So if we choose to resonate in that higher frequency now, well, who's to say when we wake up tomorrow we're not living within that space of higher resonance, right? And so, I've been really trying to make it a point myself, and I know this is what you're doing too, to embody that in the now. This is not a future destination. This is not something that, we're planning down the. Obviously, it's good to dream of the future, but to create the future, we need to be in it now. And that's kind of the point I'm making here. And I know that's exactly what you're doing in your work. But I
The
think
only
that's
thing,
the most important thing.
respectfully, the only thing, if I could jump in,
Hmm.
the only thing, caution there is that there is no them that is observing us. So this is a misnomer that needs to also be addressed, I think, at the um, cultural level, collectively, not culture, spiritual level. We need to stop this notion that there is a satanic them doing
Hmm.
something to us. There is only us permissioning and permitting the contrast which self reveals, self reflects, and self fulfills in this realm in direct proportion or diametric proportion to the degree to which we abdicate or abnegate our sovereignty and our consciousness. So once you fully compute that, understand that, comprehend that, there is no them. There was never a them. There cannot be a them. There can only be a greater unresolved you and me in the equation.
Hmm.
So let's dismiss the greater unresolved you and I, and let's become fully actualized in the living moment, because the geometry of now is perfect always in all ways and can only ever be thus. And that owning of the living moment, the now, is the living testament, is the living gospel, is the very thing that the Master Jesus spoke to. Also, the very thing that all great sages and avatars and masters speak to. It is the living flame, the only thing that matters. Looking over your shoulder is an absolute nonsense, and looking to the future is an absolute nonsense in that sense. We are charged with the propensity to be able to fully anchor patterns of perfection into this realm now and manifest heaven on earth now in the 3D temporal realm, which thus becomes the fifth dimensional realm, if you want to think of it in those limited terms. But that is the propensity that we have to manifest the kingdom of heaven in the here and now, which is to say, to take fully upon our shoulders, our beleaguered humanoid shoulders, to take fully the Christed mantle and thereby become immortal and immanent. So that's the biological ascension piece that is happening in our lifetime, whether we like it or not. It's happening. To some people who have entrained and therefore entrapped themselves into fully binarized so-called timeline, but call that an aspect. It's a timeline. I don't like timeline. I don't like the notion, but it's okay to speak in those terms. A particularly fixed aspect which has become atrophied and dead. A classic case would be a dogmatic Christian or a dogmatic fundamentalist Muslim.
Hmm.
And they are people, and even a kind of genuflecting Buddhist who does their fucking Namya Ho Renge Kyo, every day, and yet still harbors a shade in the heart when thinking about, family members or, all the usual unresolved shit that humans carry around with them. So the point is, most people, humans who are entrained, entrap themselves into a dogmatic, calcified aspect. So that becomes a dead thing. So
Hmm.
they're dead. And anything that is dead cannot survive what's coming, what's underway. So all of that manifest deadness in Hollywood, the again iconography, the iconoclasticism, the idolatry of false light worship, which was codified and personified in Hollywood, California, City of Angels. The whole world has been mind fucked in the last century plus to look to Hollywood as being the great, the great searing bright light. And so that's what it's done. It's manifested in perfect proportion to the degree to which we willed it into manifestation, all of us, generationally, incarnationally. And so what's happened now this week, by the grace of the living God, is that all that is dead has been rendered into the apocalypse and
Mhm.
the flames of the apocalypse. And what is real is now about to emerge: fellowship, zero point economics, which is to say, caring and sharing, contributionism, love thy neighbor, fellowship. I've been saying it for years, as my people know. I've been saying it for years. The only currency and the true currency is fellowship. And once we get that, and then you have slightly more subtle um, elements like good ideas. Good ideas is also a currency. The new currency that's emerging will be primarily fellowship, communion, and then it'll become good ideas. And then
Mhm.
it'll be good dreaming. Wise dreaming will become the greatest currency of all. Can you imagine a future, a world wherein, goodly, godly souls come together and lean in to projecting just beautiful collective dreaming, plasma projecting of ever higher iterations and octaves of expression. And they then manifest in real time that reality in the holograph of this limitless quantum realm. Well, that's real. There are star systems that live exactly in that way. And
Mhm.
those genetic strains in those star systems are connected directly through the waters of space into the quantum of human genetics. And that's what's awakening right now. But first, burn off that which is dead. And by that I include this beautiful place. I mean, this is my home. This is a paradise. It goes on forever. It's the most stunning place. It's very famous. And I look at this. I come here for 2 weeks of the year, maybe three at the most. I don't enjoy this luxury and indulgence anymore. I've gifted it more or less to the new earth, and it makes its way. It's a place that for meetings and for people to have community and ceremony and what have you. And I spend most of my time in the dust and the dirt, whether it's Botswana or Mexico or whatever. I have no interest in this, and I know because I have consciously trained myself out of materialism in that sense. If this place were to be consumed by a fire tomorrow, I swear by the living Christ, I would not shed a single tear, not capable of shedding a single tear. And I don't care what gets incinerated, except for my poodles. I say that because one of the down there at the gate. I don't know if you can
Mhm.
see her.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
So I have two. I call them my heavenly clouds. I've got
Mhm.
two white poodles here, and that's all I care about. Everything else can be damned because it is dead. It's damned. It's dead already. It's part of the old fallen light of Atlantis. All the majesty and the beauty is already dead, and I'm envisioning a world that is so far beyond material, any of these materials. Having said that, I don't um, I don't want to piss on my living credo of elevating art, beauty, and consciousness because I believe that to be desperately important. But it's not that the art becomes important in and of itself, the paintings and the sculptures and the tapestries and the ceramics and it's not that the artwork becomes important in and of itself. It's that the artwork and the elevation of art in one's life is a worthy um, dispensation of energy and so-called time.
Mhm.
If we're going to play in this realm, then let's elevate everything into art, beauty, and consciousness. And then you've got strange conundrums that you need to also compute. The House of Rothschild, classic example here. The greatest patrons of art in history, the House of Rothschild, arguably the most satanic and darkest and blood-curdling bloodline on the face of the earth and in history, in certainly in modern history. So what gives there? Going back to the black nobility, the House of the Medici.
Mhm.
also the greatest benefactors of the arts, going back to the crowns of Europe, of Queen Elizabeth I, 500 years ago, patron of all high culture and arts, whilst they were also, financing inquisitions and holocausts elsewhere and pulling people apart limb to limb and, disemboweling them in the market squares and torching, saints on wooden pyres. So all of this weird stuff, this confluence of high art, Gothic architecture, and satanic ritualism and historical narratives, it's all a goddamn godless lie. It's all a fiction. None of it makes sense. How is it, do you imagine, that we had these exquisite Gothic spires in cathedrals, all and synagogues and temples all across the surface of this limitless earth? At the same time, they were wearing hoods and conducting inquisitions and torturing people in the Christian basement and in the Ottoman basement and in the whatever basement. None of it makes sense.
Mm.
So it's all a godless lie. The material world, the material universe is all dead. It all speaks to dead and the fallen light of Atlantis. So I'm just expounding on the point and on the fact that it is fine to elevate art, beauty, and consciousness, but it is not fine to identify with it in the temporal realm. We must always, I mean, I'm barefoot by nature, so I don't wear shoes unless it's cold or unless I absolutely have to. And I think that if I were king of the world, like Elon Musk is intended to become, I would insist that people go back to being barefoot and drinking in the telluric codes of the inner earth in order to activate the pineal and the kundalini rising. Nothing brings you closer to the bosom of the true God, the great big teat of the Magdalene, than being barefoot.
Mm, right. Well, it gives you that direct connection to the earth, and as soon as you put on a pair of shoes, you lose that electromagnetic connection underneath you. And, that's just one aspect of the great lie that we've lived within. And, I think what you're speaking to is also like the true nature of our reality. So many people, especially when we're looking at like dogmatic religion and, when we talk about God, it's again it's that outsourcing, it's that externalization, right? Oh, there's the little pup, and it's
Well, one of them, the other one's going for her little walk
mm.
outdoors right
I love it. I love it. Well, maybe my cat will join the podcast. She does once in a while, but she's a little camera shy too. Um, but and it's that externalization process, right? And when we externalize, people don't seem to realize we can only perceive what, maybe 3-5% of reality at absolute most with our sensory perception. So, to remember the true nature of who we are and to understand who we are beyond this form, identity, ego, all the material objects and identifications we're so used to defining ourselves by. People don't, we're not taught to look within to actually understand the true nature of reality and how the game is played, in that we are immortal beyond just this body, beyond just this form, right? And that in itself, when you can start to actually not just intellectualize that truth, right? I mean, because there's almost a process of learning and understanding it. There was a point where I kind of knew that intellectually, but I didn't know how to fully access it on a spiritual level, right? But once you actually know it, embody it, feel it, it makes all, like what you're saying, it makes all of the external, you just kind of shrug your shoulders at it, right? There is no attachment to the external reality. I'm in the same way where it's like, if my place were to burn down tomorrow, I'd hopefully just have my cat. We'd go out into the world, we'd figure it out. Shrug my shoulders is what it is. If they were to completely take my podcast off the air, I couldn't post anymore whatsoever, no internet. Oh, okay, that's fine. Shrug my shoulders, move on, right? There's no attachment to
That
these
that that's the greater
constructs.
that's the greater truth the world is about to learn through the eyes of Hollywood icons and pundits in North America, who are going to be speaking increasingly now to the theme of loss and transmuting loss into a set of values. So for sure, that's going to become the new narrative.
Could you speak on that a little bit more too? Because I do feel like we're almost in, and something I was going to bring up. It feels like we're almost in a death stage, if you will, right? And with death, there is grief, there is loss, there is healing and letting go, surrendering, right? So it feels like we're in this almost as
It
this.
depends which hemisphere you're speaking from. So again, I've just come from sub-Saharan Africa. I was born in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm a generational white African, and I've just been for the last few months in sub-Saharan Africa. I've spent most of the last 6 months there, and I just returned a few days ago. So I can tell you that in sub-Saharan Africa and Africa in the main, I could say Central to South Africa, not so much the Middle East and the Levant, because that part of the world is so caught up in the shit show.
Mhm.
Whether you're talking about the site could have Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Bahrain, these edifices, Saudi Arabia, even these edifices of Babylonian architecture and social economics, which is all being orchestrated and construed in order to green the desert or to at least enliven the desert using the petrodollar and oil gas money quite sagaciously. I mean, I think that they've been very smart. These crypto royal houses of the Maktoum and the Al Khalifa and the Al Sharifa and so on, they've done a good job of taking the petrodollar, their earnings from the oil and gas hegemony over the last 50, 75 years. They've taken that money and quite wisely not kept it in the banks, but have spent it in real estate, in building out real estate, and in that sense enlivening their own landscape socioeconomically and ecologically. And I think that's very smart, and hats off to them. Um, Having said that, the whole petrodollar thing, and I can't blame, for instance, the Sheikh Maktoum or any one of these guys. They were born into this. They're products of their birthright or birth wrong in that case. But the fact of the matter is that the British crown and the French and other crowns were essentially responsible for playing Game of Thrones in Africa back in the day, toppling the good kings, the good chiefs, and the good sheikhs, and putting the corrupt cousins and uncles of those kings and sheikhs and chiefs onto the throne because they'd been bought and were sympathetic with the political ambitions or financial ambitions of the British Empire or French Empire and so on. So that's described Balfour Declaration, Lawrence of Arabia, all that bullshit really issued as a result. Well, not as a result, but Lawrence of Arabia, delightful kind of imperialist psychopath, under cover of being some great wistful, hero, was just a fucking crown agent. And what we see and what we've seen in the last 75 years, 100 years in that part of the world is just dirty deals. The
Mhm.
oil and gas hegemony, the petrodollar became the backbone of the global economy, and that backbone was rotten to the core. I don't have a problem with oil per se or gas per se. In terms of, I know it's not something that we're running out of. There's limitless amounts of it. But the fact of the matter is that oil is plasma of the earth. It's like blood in the vessels
Mhm.
and the arteries of the world. So to bring blood up from the womb of Gaia to the surface and to then combust it using fire and then harness false light, hot electrical values into a utility and using that utility to enslave humanity, forcing it into the grid, the kill grid, electricity. And I'm not talking the Nikola Tesla kind. I'm talking the J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison, Midnight Mason kind of electrification of the world, which immediately led to cancers. So electricity, false light electricity, bad Atlantean light capture, and harvest as a harness as a utility became cancer. And at the same time, the byproducts of the oil and gas hegemony was the plastics industry. And so the plastics industry was the onset of the synthetic molecule becoming endemic in the air, the water, and the soil, and of course, the biome of all living systems. So the endemic and systemic poisoning of all biological systems, emphasis the human being, really is a direct result of the plastics, agrochemical, pharmaceutical, oil and gas hegemony, and all of that is codified in Dubai, in
Mm.
Qatar, Bahrain, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and beyond, North Africa. So let's understand that when I talk about that strip, I'm not talking about the heart of Africa at all, even though they're African. They do not have anything connected to the heart of Africa. Now, one man called Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi, did have a connection to the heart of Africa and understood the African pulse, responded to it in the course of his life, even although he was also a conflated puppet dictator at a given point, but he had a heart. And he also wanted to, possibly an overachiever, he also sought to reach for the Promethean fire, and certainly it killed him in the end. But he was looking to emancipate Libya, and he was looking to aggregate the resources of Africa behind an African currency, and Libya was leading the fray until bitch Clinton and her satanic cabal decided to turn the crosshairs onto Muammar Gaddafi and murder a very, very enlightened and good leader, if eccentric leader, in broad daylight, which was one of the most grotesque things to happen in history. But that notwithstanding, let's now look at the rest of Africa. Um, it's a very curious place, and there is an upshift that's happening. And the upshift is connected to a resurrection of hereditary and cultural restoration. It is a new vanguard, young school of political echelon, a young political echelon who are now taking power in those countries and are not going to be taking the knee to the World Trade Organization or the International Monetary Fund or the Bank of International Settlements or the World Health Organization, just to name four satanic edifices of the United Nations. So they're not interested. They're not going to be going that way. I know because I'm communicating with a number of them, and I've just come from a series of meetings with a number of these political leaders and the royal houses as well, the kings of kings and paramount chiefs. I've met with scores of them in the last 4.5 months.
Mm.
So, fact of the matter is, there is a movement underway in Africa, a groundswell that is unstoppable and irretrievable in that sense, which I'm delighted about. So we're about to see Africa take planetary center stage within 3 to 5 years. Almost certainly by the year 2030, 2032, Africa will be on its feet. And Africa is the principal resource of the planetary economy and has been since time immemorial, going back to the Queen of Sheba and going back to Nebuchadnezzar and going back to King Solomon and beyond. So the Africa thing, and there's a reason why Africa was hogtied and was brought to its knees by the imperial interests over the last, especially over the last 500 years, subduing the dark continent and sending in Cecil John Rhodes and Dr. Livingston and all these other imperial goons, into the heart of darkness. It's a whole story. If one understands the African saga, it's a whole story connected to the greater zeitgeist of humanity and how we've been seeking to discover or rediscover our own primordial innocence. And that
Mm.
story is about to surface yet again. And I'm thrilled and honored that my own life's work is now woven deeply into the bosom of that revelation. I'll make more bold statements about that in the course of this year.
Beautiful, brother. And I was going to say, that's probably, as you're talking about it and sort of connecting dots for me, that's probably why we had the big imperial scramble of Africa, right? That's why Bill Gates goes in and they try and use it as a testing ground for, all of their medicines and whatnot, and it's to suppress that spirit that you're talking
But
about.
let me jump in there. It's not so much that's putting it politely, Evan.
Hmm.
So the Gates, the Gates Zen, Bill Gates is a Zen master. Number one, I've been saying this for years. So regard Bill Gates as your Zen master.
Okay.
He's a great Confucian high Zen master, absolute odious piece of shit human being. But in the archetypal sense, what he represents to the world as a counterpoint geometry of wickedness is a Zen mastery. It just is, because it's so perfectly attuned as the contrast against which we are now forced to define our decency and goodness as a humanity. So that's why Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates should be enshrined as Zen masters. But it's not so much that Bill Gates and his ilk, the Fabianists, have been at experimenting on Africa. The experimenting was done a long, long time ago. They perfected the genomic intervention a long, long time ago. It's that Africa is being subjected to the harvest of humanity. There's been an endemic effort to harvest Africa and the black genome, without a doubt. But the same thing is true of the yellow genome, the avian flu and bird flus and Asian flu, all of that stuff. It's been leveled against the redskins and against the white skins as well, if we really understand history. So all of humanity in that sense have been variously targeted as population groups, as demographics, to be brought into a greater sacrifice of innocence or harvest of humanity scenario. Why? Because that harvesting of great swathes of humanity is, and bloodletting is black magic at the meta level. And that bloodletting activates certain powers, temporal powers for Babylonian priesthoods, so to speak, Sabbatean echelon, so to speak, which is well known.
Hmm.
Part of my lecture now that I'm kicking off next month focuses on Solomon, King Solomon, and that whole myth, that whole storyline. Yes, he was as real can be,
Hmm.
but is he who we believe him to be? What was his true role as the supreme King of Kings, the most powerful temporal ruler of humanity that the world has ever seen? And to this day, an archetype that we hearken back to as being the arbiter of everything judicious and high-minded and noble. Nothing could be further from the truth. If we understand, truly understand what Solomon, Salt Man, did, or Sun Man, did to humanity by downgrading the consciousness of humanity in a simple technological intervention by taking water and feeding it into cisterns and pipes and feeding his citizens. Unstructured water or destructurized water was the way of disconnecting humanity from the primary waters of the world, thereby disconnecting us from our typhonic consciousness, thereby downgrading our immanence, our immortality, our divinity, and rendering us into harvestable creatures. And so that's, and then now when we look to Israel, and we understand the house of Rothschild, Red Shield, is now rebuilding and has been rebuilding the Temple of Solomon. Why? What's the connection between Alpha Solomon and Beta or Omega Solomon? That it is that the Lucifer, the incoming 1,000-year reign of Lucifer, the intended bad dreaming timeline of the 1,000-year reign of Lucifer, is something still posited and intended by these satanic forces. Best
Hmm.
of luck to them. I see a very, very different outcome from this aspect.
Right. And I do as well, and I think the Luciferian influence within the Matrix is very much coming to light in a lot of ways to a lot of people. And now people have to make that choice of where if they're going to acquiesce to that, because kind of goes back to what you were saying, where we are not being victimized by by the ones who are intending this sort of reign of false light Lucifer. We're not a victim of it. We are simply making conscious or unconscious choices to acquiesce and create the world as we want, or as has been given to us in a simple sense, right? And so I think that true awakening is the awakening of choice and the empowerment to stand and dream and to not bend the knee in the purest sense, right? And I think it comes back to that idea of, and this is something I've really sat with myself over the last year in particular, is the idea of that reckoning. And almost, I appreciate the fable or the story of like Judgment Day, for example, simply from the metaphorical aspect of, can we sit with the totality of our choices on an individual level, on a collective level, recognize what it has already manifested, and then from there choose the path that we align with and resonate with, right? And so this time, it kind of comes full circle for what we were talking about. It is a time of reckoning and a time of to make consciously empowered choices so that we don't end up creating a world that is not in alignment with that true nature of who we are, that true spirit of God that lives within. Um, and I think the apocalypse, as you've called it, and I would definitely use that word as well. This is to awaken us to that choice. It is happening exactly as it is supposed to. And we can't sit here and feel like victims or feel disempowered because we see the fires of wrath of our own choices now coming to fruition. Let it empower us. Let us stand firm in the knowing of who we are so we can create this new world that you and I are very much aligned in. And because we're sitting here talking about it, obviously we aren't the only two who are in alignment with this. There are many others, all over the world. I've met people here in rural South Dakota. You wouldn't necessarily think of it as a hotbed for spirituality, who are some of the most enlightened, um, loving, compassionate, and fully, I would say, awakened people that I've met. More so than even in these cities, Los Angeles, and I spent a lot of time, lived in Boston for a long time. That's where I was born. So especially in those parts where we don't necessarily view it as the pinnacle of spirituality, or uh, but this is where I think the real work is happening. It's and it's interesting, as we call um, the Black Hills out here in South Dakota, the Lakota tribe. They always they recognize that the earth has almost like chakra points and energy points throughout the earth, right? And they viewed the Black Hills as the heart of the world, right? It was in their traditions and their stories that right here in small South Dakota, no real quote unquote significance in the grand scheme of a lot of the political games, all of that. To the Lakota tribe, this was the heart center of Mother Earth, right? And I can feel that myself. I think that's why I ended up here, right? Because my own journey has been an awakening of the heart. Heart lead, brain follow, right? I heard David Icke say that one day, and I was like, wow, it's so profound, it's so simple, but that is the deepest of truths. Heart lead, brain follow, right? And so I think this awakening of the heart is what's going to shift us into this new earth and to create something that is truly beautiful and magnificent, to where these Luciferian ideologies are going to, they can't survive within that space of resonance, within that vibration, because it's of lower frequency, right? And if we are collectively resonating with the heart, then there's infinite possibilities for what we can create and who we can be, you know? So I know there's not much of a question in that, my friend, but
There
definitely,
was no question in that at all. But hearing your perspective loud and clear.
absolutely. And you know, to how would you say, for anybody who is listening to this and they sort of feel this call to like step into the space of reckoning? This is something I, kind of wanted to ask a little earlier. They feel called to step into this space to recognize. who we are, who we have been, what do you feel that process actually entails? Is it as simple as choosing to follow the path of the heart and allowing that to guide you forward, right? Is there a process of mourning?
I'll cut you off at the pass right there because the heart has nothing to do with it. And I think it's just dangerously stupid language. I understand it. And I'm pointing this at the civilization, at our entire model that we've dreamt up in certainly in the last 50 years since the 1970s. This nonsense about the heart, the heart, the heart, the heart, the heart. It's got nothing to do with the heart, and nor should it have anything to do with the heart. It's got everything to do with the psionic center, the typhonic center, which is gut,
Mm,
intuitive, gut, instinctual intelligence. Heart is a beautiful thing. Heart is always going to choose the light and not the shade. Heart is a sweet and a soft space. And the mind is a slightly more acerbic and frosty and calculating and cold. It's not warm, it's cold. A heart is warm, mind is cold. We get the dialectic of the mind and the heart. I personally see the mind and the heart as being equally flawed and equally faulty, which is why I urge not to situate oneself in either the mind or the heart, because you will simply be again bouncing around or circle jerking on that revolving door of the checkerboard of the kingdom of the devil. When look at your own life, look at your own family, look at I'm speaking to your audience. Look at your own families. You know it moves from love into hate. One minute
mm,
you love your brother, next minute you hate his fucking guts. You love your neighbor, then you hate them. You love your boss, then you hate them. You love your lover, then you hate them. You're moving constantly between this dialectic of being attracted to something and then repelling from it. So this is
mm,
born built into the human genome and the kind of human expression, the human nonsense, the white noise of being a what? A psycho-emotional human, a psycho-emotional technology designed to be pumping all sorts of adrenaline into your blood all the time in order for you to be putting out energy that can be harvested by lower elemental creatures or by your subdimensional, hyperdimensional egregores. So most humans are simply batteries, capacitors of psycho-emotional bullshit, plasma that's literally leaching out of you. Because a human being is like a light bulb, a cosmic light bulb. They are allowed, they're attuned, genetically attuned to the heart of God, to the hyperdimensional spheres. And so a human being is like a light bulb that's glowing in this abyss. And lower forces have always known. That's how priesthoods arrived. That's how monotheistic religions emerged off this principle that human beings can be harvested for energy inside this binary dualistic aspect of the universe. And so we are always subjected to these gods, these egregores. And the gods are the very thing that we don't want to aspire to, but that we do in the false sense
mm,
aspire to them through our false light religious doctrine and dogma. But it's not what we want. Heart leads us there, mind leads us there. So therefore, wise man says, step back from both the heart and the mind until they are perfectly quelled, until they perfectly zero each other out.
mm,
That becomes the state of witness, again, the state of grace. And then what activates is the knowing and the
mm,
be here now. And the I am, the sacred I am speaks to that principle, that living principle of the psionic gut typhonic intelligence that is directly in coherence with the mind of God, with the will of God, so to speak. Whether thy will be done becomes the my will be done. The sons and daughters of God become actualized in this mortal sphere, and thereafter and thereby we are able to do great and good things, even greater than the man from Nazareth. And you see, that's the story, but it's to do with the true seat of intelligence, the true throne of intelligence,
mm.
which is right here in the navel. It's the gut instinctual intelligence in that sense. So I just urge, I love the talk about heart And of course, the question you asked was a noble question, but the answer is a resounding no. Do not be led by the heart in that sense. Unless we're talking about the Christed heart or the
Mm.
heart of the Magdalene, which again is a perfect synthesis of the mind and the heart, where they zero each other out, and the greater I am, the lotus and the Kundalini erupts, and the pineal is becomes
Mm.
activated, actualized, and so that antenna directly to God becomes activated. And in that sense, yes, the greater heart of humanity, we could speak in those terms.
Right. Well, and I'm glad you pointed that out because exactly what you were just speaking to, the greater heart, it's like the language is so important because I've always just simply associated that with heart. But when you
Mm,
actually start getting into the very specifics, you're exactly right. Where that greater knowing isn't, I can look to myself, that greater knowing, witnessing, it isn't necessarily directed in the heart per se,
mm,
even if
mm,
language wise, that's sort of what I've been accustomed, conditioned, whatever the words you want to use, to almost direct that or label that point of source to be within there. But you're exactly right. And, I think that's one of the, I don't want to say pitfalls, but challenges within, particularly when we're looking at these concepts, is to have a deeper understanding and deeper knowing of the language and being very conscious because words are spells, right? And where we're going to follow and create exactly what we speak, even if what we're speaking is not exactly what we're intending, right? And so there's a lot of word magic around that. And if we're saying follow the heart, and somebody takes that to follow the heart in all instances, just like you pointed out, that can actually lead, that plays the same game. So I'm really, really glad you made that distinction. And I don't think I've heard anyone else make that distinction with as much clarity and the true knowing of the true source of that knowing. So I applaud you on that because I don't hear many people speaking of it in those terms, even when we're talking about the greater heart per se. A lot of times it
very
just get
unpopular. It's
right.
very unpopular language in the same way that I despise people talking about co-creation. And every time I hear this grotesquerie, I have to address it and apprehend it and just say, stop. Can you hear yourself, people? What do you mean co-creation? Why are we saying thank you for co-creating with me, and oh, how I look forward to co-creating with you? What a risible language. And some of the people that I love the most in this world and have the highest respect and regard for are completely steeped in that Luciferian language. By Luciferian, I mean false light. Again, really lost, because if anyone is sitting in the pure geometry of syntax, which is to say universal syntax, which is to say pure truth, anyone seated there knows that it's an abomination to say co-create. Even the utterance of the word is a violation of universal law 101, which is that there is only creation. There is no co-creation. To co-create is to split the infinitive and to break a unification principle into two and then into more and fracture it. To co-create is to talk about your ego and how your ego is leaning in with another ego to create a greater ego. Well, how about we just create? I would like
Mm.
to create with you. We are creators. I am creator. There we go. There's a statement. I am creator.
Beautiful. And we are creating here and now in the present. Exactly. I've never resonated with the word co-create either. So I'm glad you pointed that out. And Sasha, just to, kind of as a reflective question for the audience to kind of give some, I guess, directive, where do you feel it is that, as we are creating this new world and new earth and aligning ourselves to these higher frequencies, where do you feel it is that we may be most, and speaking collectively here, generally here, obviously every individual is going to be a bit different, but where do you see the collective being most vulnerable to kind of these false light ideals that you're speaking to? Is there an area that you continue to witness where it's like, wow, I can't believe we keep getting duped in this way, right? Are there certain things that you're seeing that as it continues to play out, that we should be more weary of, should pay more, a bit closer attention, that something might be more Luciferian false light versus actually aligned, um, with higher consciousness, right? Is there some vulnerability points that you notice that you would um, speak to per se?
Well, if you want to get to the crux of the matter, you have to use the Socratic approach. And the Socratic approach means just get to the source code. And the source code of all myopia and of all dystopia, of all that ails the human in our self-imposed trial of separation in this purdah of a third density field of reality, on the surface of a is it, isn't it, a torus, a flat earth, a round earth conundrum. So long as we are caught in the crossfire and the flux of all of this white noise in the trial of separation, as the fallen ones, so to speak, why do we not just simply go straight to the source code? The source code would be time itself, the idea of time. And again, I've spoken at great length on this subject. Certainly for the last 11 years, I've been screeching about it. No, longer, since 2012, since 2012, essentially. And I've really made a point of speaking to it. But time, the idea of time, the myth of time, is the thing that needs to be apprehended and addressed. Uh, uh, and each of us have to do it in our own time. We have to do it because if we wish to resurrect ourselves from the fiction of our false light selves, the ego self, if we wish to enlighten within and to turn that light on, then we are forced to do a reckoning with time,
Mm.
because time is the great fiction. And again, my long form lectures always start with Cronus, the Lord of Time, and the connection with Zeus and Cronus. Cronus, the Lord of Time, the Lords of Time, the Archons, the 1260, the onset of a 12-month calendric system, which took us completely out of true with the real organic 13-month system. What happened to the house of the snake, the house of the dragon? Well, it was erased. 13 was subverted and distorted into being an unlucky number. The idea that 13 was an unlucky number was a spell that was programmed into the culture, our culture, for a good reason, so that we didn't look at the 13th house, so that we never even look at the number and sit with it long enough, because, well, it's imbued with this idea of bad luck. Very, very clever inversion logic and spellbinding at that, again, psychocultural level. But when you understand that TikTok time is the root of all ills, that before the idea of time had gained traction, and time is simply a technology. Time is money. That is
Mhm.
true. Time is money. Money and time are the same equation. And so is fear. Fear of anything can only ever be attributed to time. You can't be afraid or even acknowledge fear. It doesn't touch you if you don't situate yourself in the frame, the false light frame of time. So fear and time and money are exactly the same equation, and they denote and define perfectly the trial of separation from source. So the separation from source is time, is the idea of time, and that becomes a false metric within which we choose, apparently, to cyclically incarnate time and time and time again. And until we have individually and then collectively released ourselves from this false light thrall of the idea of time and money and fear, we will be entrapped and entrained into that revolving door, which is the karma dharma cycle of reincarnation. And again, die, come out of the body, see the light at the end of the tunnel, make the heinous mistake of following the light at the end of the tunnel, and get subsumed and sucked right back into, parked into some element of the heavenly realm, which is also part of the greater holograph, and then through the laws of entropy, be pulled back again into another incarnation, aka harvest cycle, because an incarnation is simply a harvest cycle. So whenever I fall victim to going off and having a feverish wank, of a pornographic magazine, or go and grab a cigarette behind the bicycle shed, or worse, go and snort cocaine or crystal meth, or worse, become a endemic alcoholic, and tyrant in my life with my family and my work, my colleagues, or worse, become a ritual satanic individual connected to these billions and millions of souls around the world who are very actively involved in these Luciferic and satanic practices, all of which you'll find all of those addictive practices. Again, anything that creates an addiction is hauling, is plasma, is harvesting your plasma into a critical narrative, into a critical energy field back loop or fold back loop, which will ultimately destroy you, because it's ultimately you allowing your life force to be leached through that excessive sexualization or sexuality or drug addiction or alcoholic addiction or whatever it is that adrenalizes you. Some people just like being shitty. A lot of old cronish women make that mistake. They think that because they reach that status in life of being an old woman, that they are, can only be sweet and cute, but they're not. Many of them are nasty. They become the crone, and they gossip, and they wheeze, and they cast spells on people without even knowing it. So I'm just saying these become addictive pathologies in the human, and they end up becoming the very thing that pulls you into entropy and hurls you back into another cycle, until we can see and create that absolute still point where we can enjoy the fruits of life, including sex, drugs, and rock and roll, if that turns you on, but not allow them to become the central thrust of our engine room, because that's the piece I'm talking about here. But there's not many humans who can walk through the garden of life and just pick a fruit here and a berry here, and enjoy it for itself without having to have more of it. And that's the sensory thing. Sensuality is a very, very dangerous a taskmaster in this
Mhm.
realm. In any event, I've gone completely off script and completely forgotten the
I
genesis point
I love
question.
it. I love it. I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, I think it actually speaks exactly to what I was asking, in that if people want to look in their own lives and actually really start this, a lot of the principles that we've talked about throughout this whole show, and actually step into this space of reckoning, it is to start looking at one's own life and looking at their relationship with time, looking at their relationship to how they show up each and every day in each and every moment, and who they are through their choices each day. Right. I mean, and I think that's the, you could call it a tangent if you want, what you just went on, but I think if anything, it was a beautiful symphony.
Oh, I started by talking about time, so thank you for that. But yes, it was time. I was saying that, yes, if there is one critical failure point, or a weak chink in the armor, or a weak link in the chain, that's a generic weak link in the chain, it would be the false adherence to the idea of time. And I'm going to try and distill this even further. Wishing each other happy birthday or happy anniversary. This is sweet, but it's deadly.
Hmm.
Sweet, but deadly. So which would you prefer? I would rather not have anything deadly around me. So I don't want to be wished happy birthday or happy anniversary, because I don't wish to celebrate the fiction of time, because it's a satanic ritual. So I'm not a Satanist. I recognize Satan as a principle. I recognize Saturnian logic as an orchestra of chaos against which I can define my own genius or my own superluminal angelic nature. And therefore I bow to the gods of time, the lords of time. I salute them, but I do not attach or identify in any way, shape, or form. In fact, my salutation is, get thee behind me, Satan. My salutation is that I will not take the knee to Cronus. I will not acknowledge or accede to time ever. And I don't. So I suspended that in my own life in 1997. There, I remember the date, and it was a long time ago. But that was the time I departed time. And I meant it. And I've been true to that. And a lot of people in this world hate me and find great umbrage in my tone and my resonance and my voice and the things I say and the things I apparently do. Anyone who bothers or cares enough to study my own kind of um, renown in social media and in the kind of trolling underbelly of the activism world knows that I'm one of those so-called influencers who comes under systemic attack constantly and really ugly, really nasty stuff. So there was a time years ago when I felt the pain of those abuses and those injuries to my person. And I would cry and I would cradle myself and ask, why am I subjected to such hate and such sinful attacks by random strangers until I started to realize, the common parlance today is, oh, well, you're right over the target, so therefore you're getting shot. Yeah, yeah, whatever. But I'm saying if you're in that situation and you're reading articles about yourself and seeing YouTube videos being sent to you by friends and family and followers constantly, videos and little films being made about you and accusations by this person and that person that I'm a ritual Satanist. I participate in blood sacrifices with babies, and people have gone to tribunals. Apparently, Jane Does have gone pixelated and detuned voices in testifying at tribunals that I was seen at a sacrifice with sitting next to Elon Musk whilst babies were being sacrificed. That was the latest one I saw recently, and so on. And to stupid people. And I've been every evil thing under the sun. I'm Vatican agent, Crown agent, Vatican assassin, orchestrate the killings of people. Seen how many people die around Sacha Stone whenever he goes on tour? People, well, it's kind of true, but a lot of people did die on my last tour. 5 or 6 people died around me. It's true, but we know why. We know what we were doing on that big tour after, to tell the truth about COVID. And we were the ones opening up the path and clearing the path for what's now becoming mainstream. I was doing it years ago, 6, 7 years ago, screaming about COVID, about vaccines, about weaponization of the biosphere, about the confluence of glyphosates and fluoride and the 5G weaponized, ethers, making films about it and conducting tribunals and, judicial inquiries about that. So I've done all of that stuff for years. So to stupid humans, and I've done on the world stage. And I've
Mhm.
been a director general in the IGO sector in the United Nations. I've had high status there. I've met with world leaders for 25 years, and I work at that level. But I still take the time to come down into the swamp to talk to good, little dirty human beings. So stupid humans can't work out who the fuck I am, and nor should they, nor will they ever be able to work out who I am. And
Mhm.
people think I'm rich when I don't even have a bank account
Mhm.
because I control technologies, I control organizations and initiatives, but I've never taken personal wealth because I don't want it. I am an embodiment of the 0 point principle that I'm talking about. I've never taken a salary. I don't raise money from investors and take money from them. Investors who invest in anything connected to me is to do with land and to do with, companies administering the land. I don't draw salaries off anything. Never did, never will. I didn't take a salary at the United Nations, refused to. How do I make my money? None of your goddamn business. But anyone who cares to actually investigate can work out. Oh, it's pretty obvious. He launches technologies here. He puts out, microbiological formulas there. He actually creates things, manufactures things, puts them out there. but I don't take the glory and position myself as an Elon Musk or this or that. And I do not have money to speak of, nor do I want it. But we've got things happening this year, 2025, which are unleashing huge abundance and prosperity. At this stage, that's the way it's looking. Maybe I'll eat my words later this year. Let's revisit a
Yeah.
conversation in 6 months. But I'm just saying I couldn't care one way or the other. I've already said it. I have a sarong. I don't even have any bloody underwear on, if that matters. I'm barefoot. I've got a shirt on as a courtesy. Otherwise, I wouldn't even have that on. I've got an ex-girlfriend's piece of jewelry on because I don't buy anything for myself. Same thing with that. My life is simple and it's
Mm,
beautiful and complex at the same time. You know, it's being in the now, but recognizing that time is the fiction. I am not owned by time. I stepped out of it a long time ago, and it gives me such incredible, I wouldn't say perspicacity, but it gives me focus. I can stand and see the unfolding images on the screen of life, and they make sense to me. So
mm,
it's very rare that you'll find me huddled up in the corner of a room going, "Why me, oh God?" or "What have I done to deserve this?" or "Why hast thou forsaken me?" or what? No, because I've just got to a point in life where I'm so simple in my own energy form that I'm able to have a certain sense of clarity in everything that unfolds.
mm,
And that's why I get a lot of phone calls from people in the intelligence community or the military or in government, political leaders, spiritual leaders. I've got one turning up tomorrow. I'm not going to name her, world famous, who's coming to learn from me for the day because she's a great master herself with a huge world stage. And she's renowned around the world, literally. And she's an elder and she's very famous. And she's coming to spend a day with me to learn from me. That was her request. Can I come and spend a whole day and learn from you? And my answer was yes. I look forward to it. She's a beloved friend. And it's not because I'm so bloody clever, it's because I'm so detached.
mm,
And I'm so in a state of clarity that when we see lights in the sky over Philadelphia, or, these palm trees bursting into flame in a Pacific Coast highway, which makes no sense in the laws of physics. I know exactly what's going on with the lights in the sky and with a spontaneous combustion. I know enough about electrochemistry. I know enough about the satanic ritualism. I know enough about the archaeo-historical narrative and agenda. It's all laid out as clear geometry to me because I'm not identified with it. And that's because, Evan, I consciously dislocated or disconnected, cut the umbilical with me and this fiction called time. And it has a tremendous blessing comes with that. And that's the blessing I would wish upon my fellows. I'll leave it at that.
mm. I love it, brother. And the authenticity shines through. And I think the root of that, as you're saying, you made that choice 20 some years ago, and there's a reason you've been on the path that you are on, and you bring the light that you do. And it's because simplicity in its purest form, I think, is authenticity, right? When you're not attached to all of these external,
I like
uh,
that.
yeah. So,
Copyright that quote, Evan. It's a good one.
all right, I will. Well, I'll give you full permissions to use it as well. So I won't hoard it. But Sasha, this has been a lot of fun, man. I've really enjoyed having you on. Is there anything where you'd send the listeners? You got any projects that are coming out that you want to announce, or just any, I guess, where you'd
No,
want to? No?
thank you. I'm not soliciting anything, but if anyone's interested, I will be at the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles, all things being equal, and by the grace of God, California is not still under siege. I think that's on the 7th of February. And then I'm starting a social tour. Anyone wanting to hook up with me, meet up with me, aim an assassin's bullet at me or whatever, come. Doors always wide open, and I'll be just moving slowly across the whole of America, with a few trips in between to back to my base in Mexico, where we're building the NewEarth sanctuary there, which is an off-grid community. And that's the most important project that I'm doing right now. Similarly, in Tennessee, we're about to launch the NewEarth Sanctuary in Tennessee and unveil the land there and open that up to folks in the US. But we have a very unique model, which is going to be pushed forward through this coast to coast tour that I'm doing in the United States, and that'll kick off in February and end up pretty much Midsummer's Day in Tennessee. We were going to end up in a spring equinox in end of March, 21st, 22nd of March. We were going to do it at Tennessee. Then myself and my team in the last week have decided to extend the tour. I was going to do a tour of Europe this summer. It was provisionally being planned with 21, 22 countries. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to tour Europe. I've taken that decision. And Europe is at this stage going up in flames, I think, this summer. And I don't wish it upon Europe. My family are there and many of my loved ones, but I don't think Europe is going to be a very sane place for the next few months, nor is North America for that matter. But my focus is to remain in Mexico at the Bacala Laguna as we build out our NewEarth sanctuary there and also launch the one in Tennessee. But yeah, I'll be touring across, zigzagging across America for as much as my visa entry will allow between now and Midsummer's Day. And Midsummer's Day, we should be seeing a major ceremonial event on the land in Tennessee that we're consecrating and doing a proclamation event there with hereditary elders and the primary Native American chiefs and elders and grandmothers in attendance at a spectacular event there as we fulfill prophecy. And we've been doing this for some time, but we're working toward piercing the corporate veil on the land and handing the land back to the Native Americans in an act of atonement. And that will technically be the energetic trigger point of the birth of the Rainbow Warrior tribe, which ancient prophecy has spoken to, and incidentally, which does occur midpoint this summer in the year 2025. So it's all kicking off. If you wanted to know why the earthquakes and the spontaneously combusting firestorms and the tsunami waves are all kicking off, and the volcanoes all around the world, yes, most most of it, by my reckoning, is orchestration, seismic weaponry, geo warfare, bio warfare, and such like. Not that that hasn't been going on for centuries, because it has, but it's also partly organic in as much as the forces of the earth are answering to that call of the restoration of the ancestral blood song. So all that was sublimated and subjugated is now arising in order to make itself or herself heard. And that, my friend, is a most beautiful thing.
Absolutely, brother. And I'm beyond excited to see everything you're doing come to fruition. And if you happen to be somewhat even close to where I'm at in South Dakota, I'll have to come on down and see you on your tour, because I think that would be awesome. So, thanks
Indeed.
again, man. Uh,
SachaStone.com. Probably remember it's SACHA, SachaStone.com is where the tour schedule will be put up imminently the next few days. So yeah,
Sweet.
anyone
I'll
can.
I'll keep my eyes on it, and I'll put it in the episode show notes too, so everybody can go on down there, check it out. Because man, the work you're doing, man, it is exactly what needs to be happening. And so I feel very blessed to share this space with you. And like I said, I'm excited to see it all come to fruition, because you're really taking on a lead role in bringing about the new earth and creating a world that is in resonance with who we are at the core. So I appreciate you, brother, and all that you're doing. And it was an honor to share the space with you.
Oh, thank you to that, and send us the link, and we'll get that syndicated on our networks. God bless you, Evan. Thank you.
Right on, brother. I appreciate it.